In this video, we want to cover the 5 signs that someone is dealing with resentment. These are kind of the 5 common areas that we've seen when coaching couples. And before I even get started any further, I want to say this. Resentment is a prison that we put ourselves into. Meaning, resentment is a self-inflicted wound. Yeah. Now, I know that you're hearing that and you're going, no, I'm entirely justified in my pain and my hurt, my frustration, my anger. And I get that.
Yeah.
I want you to just take a moment and I want you to open yourself up. Just to be open to, are these things happening in my life? Right? Sometimes people that are living with resentment don't even know that they're living with resentment because it's been going on for so long that it's just a natural part of their life. They just think it's the new norm. Yeah. And what I'm telling you right now, if you want to be free of the pain that holds you captive to the past, to the pain, to the victim that's disempowering your life, that's holding you back, come open, come hungry, come humble. Just be open to what we have to say. That is going to be the key for you to being aware. Like, these are the things that are happening in my life. I'm starting to see that in your life. And I will tell you, on the other side of this, you are going to experience such an unlock. Trust me when I say, Megan and I have been there, so we know what it's like to be in the prison, and we know what it's like to be out of the prison. So, well, as we talk about this, we're going to be kind of talking about in the context of marriage, because that's what we know. Yeah. But just know that these are signs that show up in
anyone's lives.
Yeah, whether they're friends or relatives. Yeah. It's important you recognize these signs because they can just kind of creep up and they should be triggers to say, ooh, that's something I need to attend to.
Yeah, I need to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
The first sign someone has resentment towards their spouse is they keep score. This is when they start keeping track of all the wrongdoings, all the mistakes their spouse has made. And they bring all this ammunition into every conflict. Like, I'm going to remember the 30 mistakes that they've made in our marriage, and it's going to come out in conflict. Now, sometimes it doesn't come out in conflict. It's in your thoughts. So it might not be said out loud, but you're thinking about it and you're thinking about all those wrongdoings, all those mistakes, and you're keeping score. Well, I'm not as messy as my spouse. Well, I do more around the house than my spouse does. And it becomes this thing where who's doing better, who's doing more, who's right, who's wrong. And I think this is a really common one. I'm just going to make it personal. For me, this is one that I was like, ooh, this is the first sign we're going to start with because I'm going to be humble, like you said. Yeah. And I could keep score. And I think especially when I was a stay-at-home mom, I remember experiencing this a lot. I know a lot of moms and a lot of women feel this way, where you're doing all the chores. You're doing the baby stuff, the kid stuff, the errands. You're buying all the things for the home, and you're the cooking, the clean. It's just everything. And then even on top of, if you work like I do, where I work full-time and I'm raising children, it's like, well, you're not doing as much as I am. And that, it is a breeding ground for resentment to build. And it's like, well, it's not fair. And under the keeping score vibe is like, it's just not fair. Yeah. And I don't think it's fair. And how dare you? And you don't know how much I do. And that's like the core thought behind the keeping score.
They're like an emotional accountant.
Oh, for sure.
They're tracking down like, I did this. You didn't do that. Yes. I did this. You didn't do that. Yes. It's very conditional love.
It's very conditional love. And I don't think people even recognize it, myself included. And I think it's something to be very aware of. But underneath all of it is, this just isn't fair. I feel underappreciated. And look at my spouse and look at all that they're not doing. Like you said, they're keeping score. That's number one for a reason.
The second sign that someone is dealing with resentment inside their marriage is emotional outbursts. So what I want you to think of is a volcano, right? Underneath the surface is all these like gases, lava. There's a lot of energy that's happening, a lot of heat. And it's just waiting for that one moment where it explodes. And when it explodes, it's massive. Yeah. So there's so much pain and hurt in the relationship, right? It's just below the surface.
That's the gases and the energy waiting to explode.
That even at the most simplest mistake, it just becomes boom, and it's this emotional outburst. So for example, like let's pretend you forget to unload the dishwasher, right? Yeah. not a big deal.
Yeah.
But your spouse comes in and spewing all of this molten lava, these critical words, and just comes out all at once.
And you're like, where did that come from? Like, I just forgot to unload the dishwasher.
Sometimes,
this wasn't even a big deal.
Right. And sometimes we call this, you're making mountains out of molehills. Yeah. Now, I'm going to tell you, I remember when we were first married, everything.
Yeah. This was you.
Everything. Okay.
I admitted about keeping
if you
score.
keep score, yeah. Okay,
yes.
So I'm the one
yeah.
that made mountains out of molehills. I thought everything was such a big deal.
But it came out of nowhere.
Yes.
I was not ready for it.
So if you've watched some of our videos, we talked about when you dropped the bag of peas on my foot. Not a big deal. It was an accident, but it just spewed all over you.
That was the resentment you had towards me.
You left me at Target to go get the car, something super helpful, but because I was so angry, I'm like, you left me. Like, it was constant. Yeah. It was every single week. There was some sort of emotional outburst that happened in our relationship because we didn't have the tools to repair the relationship. We didn't have tools how to deal with this anger and frustration, the expectations we had for each other.
But you're not an angry person.
No.
And then also you're an avoider. So that's where, like, on the surface, it wouldn't look like he had resentment. I would have never known he had resentment. That's why we're telling you these signs.
Yeah.
Because then when you would explode, I'd be like, whoa, like, where is this coming from? And I didn't know that it was because he had all this hurt and anger that you had held on to towards me. And it was under that surface. And it just took whatever random things, a bag of peas, me helping you at Target
to
unleash that. And for you, it was more, and I think that's because you're an avoider, right?
Okay, but hold on. But I wanted to say this. I was not an angry person. I did not have emotional outbursts until I was married.
It's true.
So that's why it caught me off guard. I was like, where's all this coming from?
Yeah, we see this with couples coaching where people will say, well, I never saw my husband angry. I never saw my wife angry. And now all of a sudden, it's not all of a sudden.
So let's talk about avoiders and fighters.
Okay,
I want to talk about that dynamic. Because as avoiders, what we do is we're avoiding the issues. So we just stuff. Oh. And then when conflict comes out, it's all 20 things that we had issues with.
Yeah.
And so it turns conflict into a very toxic situation because now you're stacking the deck and it's coming out with so much volatility.
And for someone who's a fighter, hey, it's me, I'm the problem. Married to an avoider it felt very unnerving because it's coming out of nowhere.
Yeah.
As for me, a fighter, if you're a fighter like I am and can identify, we kind of already come on attack mode.
Yeah. So
like if we've got resentment, you're probably going to know that we have resentment because we're going to speak up and we're going to attack. And then that's going to scare an avoider off because we're like, it's a very interesting dynamic, but something to be aware of even with these emotional outbursts. Even avoiders have emotional outbursts. It's not just the fighters. Mm-hmm. We just show up differently.
Yep.
All right. The third sign that someone has resentment towards their spouse is that they are lacking empathy. You used to be kind and understanding, and you could see your spouse's perspective. And when they were hurting, you tried to feel with them, right? That's empathy, is feeling with someone. But now that you have resentment and this anger and bitterness and frustration and disappointment is just clouding the way you see them, they could even be hurting and you're not going to be empathetic anymore. That gracious, soft-spirited, understanding person who is willing to sit down and hear their spouse's perspective is no longer there. And I have a perfect example. I remember when I said something really mean to Casey. And I knew what I said was wrong. Like I knew that it wasn't good, it wasn't healthy. And I knew that it had hurt him, right? But for me, because I had resentment, I was like, well, I'm not gonna apologize for that because look at all that he did to me. And I mean, I'm hurting. Shouldn't he apologize to me? And I look back and I don't know how many times I've said that because that's resentment speaking. And we see this with couples. Again, couples in crisis. It's, well, I can't even imagine apologizing to them. You can't even see your spouse's pain. Like I couldn't even see your pain and admit your pain because I was so clouded in my own pain.
Yeah, there's no compassion.
There's no compassion. There's no feeling with when you have resentment. Empathy is one of those things that's just not present.
All right, the fourth sign that you are dealing with resentment towards your spouse is having constant negative thoughts about your spouse. So resentment lives in our thought life, and it lives both in our conscious thought life, but also our subconscious. So when I think conscious, like what happens is we often role play. we kind of live through that moment again. And then we're like, this is what I should have said, or this is what I should have done. Or what if I just punched him right in the face? Like we kind of like simmer on that and stew in that story and role play that out. So it's obsessive thoughts about that. But it also is in your subconscious because you're having these negative thoughts towards your spouse, and it really just puts you in a bad mood.
Yeah.
Your subconscious, I think we all underestimate the power of our subconscious, what we're thinking about, how it impacts our mood. So in this state, your spouse could do something with, or say something with good intentions.
Yeah.
And we override those intentions with negativity. Mm-hmm. So we often hear this, or maybe you've heard this before in your own life, is I can do no good.
Yeah.
There's nothing I can do now in the relationship that's good.
I can't win. It doesn't matter how hard I try. I can't win with my spouse. Yeah. That's typically because their spouse has resentment.
And think about resentment living in your thought life, and what you think is how you act, right?
Yeah.
So when you're stewing in resentment, you're holding yourself in that prison, not the prism, the prison of pain. You're acting out of that pain towards your spouse. So 3 things happen when we stew on these negative thoughts. We internalize it, right? So I just talked about that, and it impacts your conscious thought and your subconscious thought. Or we direct it towards our spouse, and that comes out in the way we talk to them, the way we act towards them.
It's critical, it's negative.
That's right.
Everything out of your mouth is just mean.
The third thing is we complain to others. Right? So it comes out in the conversations we have with our friends of like, oh my gosh, you never believe what my spouse did or whatnot. Yeah. So it does come out.
I would agree. I think I hear, not a lot of my friends, but I've heard a lot of women where they're like, oh, every time we get together, this one woman, she always complains about her husband, right? Yeah. That would be an example that she probably has resentment. All right, last but definitely not least, someone who has resentment towards her spouse, and this resentment has been something that's been there for a long time, is they may use retaliation. I want you to think tit for tat. I have so much resentment. I'm so angry. I'm so disappointed. I'm so frustrated that I want you to hurt too. So now I'm hurting and you made me hurt, and I'm going to try to get you back. And this is scary. This is why this is the last sign, because I think this is typically only present when resentment's been there for a long time. You don't typically see this in the beginning stages of resentment, okay? This is what revenge cheating is. You hear, if you've ever heard of revenge cheating, it's, well, you cheated on me, and well, watch this, I'm gonna go cheat on you. It's very immature. It's showing that this person is deeply hurt. And what do we know? Hurt people hurt people. Yep. It's not an excuse by any means, but I will say that this whole thing of I'm going to push your buttons. You don't communicate to me, so I'm going to give you the silent treatment. It's like this intentional choosing to hurt your spouse because you are so deep in your pain. So obviously this one's a very obvious sign that you have resentment, but this is, we would say you're in crisis mode. This is when I would say, you're not at a level of like, oh, I can just kind of figure this out. Like you need to work with one of our coaches or do a marriage intensive, something like that. But this is one of those ones that if you're the recipient, it is very scary to be married to someone like this. It is very unnerving, and there is zero trust now in the relationship. Now, again, whether you feel justified or not, like, no, they did cheat on me. You don't want to go to that level. And I think that's how you know that someone has resentment in such large amounts resentment. And the resentment might not even be just towards you. It might be like they brought that into the relationship, into the marriage, but it is acting out and it is intentionally hurting someone else.
Oh, hurting. Very much so.
Very hurting.
All right. So lastly, we would just want to give you a couple other signs that you're dealing with resentment that we've seen in relationships. Passive aggressive words and actions. Withholding or avoiding sex, frequent complaints about your spouse to other people. You've become emotionally detached in the marriage. This is the indifference. There's a lack of initiating connection or date nights. Decrease of attraction towards your partner. There's a lower desire to even be in the marriage. And then finally, stacking the deck during conflict.